Welcome to Module 6 of our course Conflict Management. This is the final module of this course, and in this module we will learn about some very effective methods to manage conflicts. We will learn about the mindsets that help us when we are managing conflicts, and of course we will look at a few things we should avoid when we are trying to manage conflicts. But before we move into this module, we should quickly recap what we have built up for ourselves in terms of understanding conflicts. So firstly, we have understood and learned that conflicts are good for us. They help us. They are required for us to progress in life. So we should welcome conflicts. Secondly, the problem is not with conflicts. The problem is about how we manage conflicts. There's a difference between resolution of a conflict and managing a conflict. Resolution is usually about suppressing or pushing it away. Managing is about looking at it positively, looking at win-win solutions, or using an appropriate process to manage them so that the whole organization, group, or team moves forward towards better learning or more productivity. We also understood what are the four kinds of conflicts: conflict in the self, conflict with others, conflict with the environment, and conflict with the supernatural. We also looked at what happens when we mismanage conflicts. We saw the psychology of why we end up mismanaging conflicts, why we try to fight, run away, or just do nothing about conflicts, and which actually aggravates them. And we also looked at what are the benefits of managing conflicts. So now that we have built a very powerful, positive, and clear approach to conflicts, let's now see how do we manage those conflicts. So in the 1970s, two researchers, Kenneth and Killman, they developed a very structured and useful concept on conflict management, which is known as the Kenneth-Killman Conflict Mode Instrument, or the TKI. And here in this module, we will understand this very effective conflict management tool. Now, as you can see in the graph, on the y-axis you have assertion, and as you go up from the bottom to the top, the assertion is going up or increasing. The x-axis has cooperation. So as you move from the left to the right, the cooperation is increasing. Now, assertion and cooperation are two key approaches which are opposites, and these are the two approaches that we can use to manage a conflict. So either we use assertion, which means pushing our way through the conflict, or we use cooperation, which is accepting whatever is being handed to us. Now, in this graph, as you can see, there are 5 different options. You have avoid, compete, accommodate, collaborate, and compromise. Now, we will discuss each of them and understand how this specific approach can be used and where it should be used, and finally where it should be avoided. So let's start with avoid. Now, as you can see, avoid is way down on both assertion and cooperation. Now, this is an approach in which we walk away from the conflict. We don't engage in any discussion, argument, sharing of point of view, or listening to the other person. We just ignore and move away from the conflict. Now here you'd say that this doesn't seem like an option at all. How am I managing a conflict? By staying away from it. But the fact is that sometimes we have conflicts which require for us to just avoid them. So avoidance is not a bad thing. It doesn't really resolve the conflict at that moment, but looking at the situation, looking at the context, looking at how other people are responding to that conflict and what other objectives you want to meet, you may want to avoid that conflict. So let's look at which are those situations in which you may want to avoid a conflict. So let's say, for example, the issue is trivial. So let's say you have a conflict with a colleague at your workplace about the position of the coffee machine. The colleague wants the coffee machine to be shifted by a couple of feet. Now you don't see why this should be done. At the same time, it's not important for you. And this colleague is trying to bring that up as a discussion with you every time. You know that it doesn't make a difference to him or to you. So you just avoid getting into that discussion because you know that it's not important either for you or for him, and maybe this person is just getting into this fight because of some ego issue. Or for example, let's say you get into a conflict with a colleague. The conflict may be important, it may be related to work, but then you come to know that this colleague has actually resigned and will be shifting out in 15 or 20 days. Now, it's not important for you to engage and try and resolve that conflict because this person will not be there after 15 days. So it would be smarter to just avoid the conflict. On the other hand, if the issue is important to you or your team, then it's a bad idea to avoid the conflict because then the issue will eventually aggravate later and cause trouble for you and your employee. Also, if it's a conflict that will aggravate over a period of time. So let's say right now it's not very big, but after a few days it will become bigger and worse. In that case, it's a good idea to not avoid the conflict. Now, this is a situation that sometimes happens with us because a conflict emerges and we don't see it as something that will grow bigger later. So we avoid it now because we are busy with other things. But later it becomes a big issue and then we have to tackle it. So avoidance is an approach, it's a solution for conflicts which has to be taken specifically in the right situation. Now let's look at another approach in the TKI instrument, which is accommodate. Now as you can see, accommodate is high on cooperation and low on assertion. So this is an approach typically where you give in to the conflict. You're not fighting, you're not pushing your way through. You're accepting what is being given to you. Now here again you might say that this doesn't seem like a great idea of resolving a conflict. But the fact is that there are certain situations where this is a great idea. It's a very good approach to solve the conflict. Now what are those kind of situations? Now let's say, for example, you get into a small minor conflict with your supervisor. The supervisor feels that this communication that is going out to the client should be drafted in a certain way. You feel it should be drafted in a different way. Now, it's not important for you. At the same time, you feel that if I accommodate, my relationship with my supervisor will improve. So here you accommodate to that conflict because it's not important and a larger objective is more important for you. Now let's take another example. Say there is a meeting which has to be conducted at 10 a.m. in the morning. You have arranged for everyone to be present in that meeting, including one of your colleagues from your team. Now this colleague of yours has some kind of a emergency or has some problem, and he calls you up and says that I can't make it to the meeting at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, I'd like it to be shifted to 12 p.m. Now this is a situation where you may want to accept this change because it's a very critical thing for this colleague. So you accommodate in this kind of a situation. On the other hand, if an accommodation is going to not really solve the problem, then you may want to avoid it. So if you take the same example of this colleague requesting you to shift the meeting by 2 hours, say you have this awareness that if you shift the meeting for this colleague for the reason that he's giving, you might find other team members also giving such reasons and asking you to shift the meetings in the future. In that case, you may want to not accommodate for the request. So here again, accommodation is an approach. It's a solution to conflict management which is very specific to the kind of situation we are facing. But if it is done the right way, it can be the most effective approach to solving conflicts. Now here let's look at the third approach to managing conflicts, and which is compete. Now as you can see, compete is way up on assertion and low on cooperation. This is an approach in which we push our way through. We demand for more. We try to win in the conflict. Well, as you may have understood now, this will not work everywhere, but only in certain specific situations where it will be very important for you to compete, to push, to get your way through. So let's understand which are the situations where competing could be a good idea to resolve conflicts. So let's say a decision has to be made very quickly around the kind of discount to be given to a client. It's a matter of a day and you have to give that discount. You are approving a 5% discount while your team members are asking for 10%. You feel that 5% is right and you have to take a decision whether within the next 6 to 7 hours. So you may decide to push through with your decision because you feel better about it, and you have to close this decision in a short period of time. Let's take another example, that there's a team member who is not performing well and is disrupting the work of the team. You have to take a decision on this team member and you decide to let him go. Now you get into conflict with your supervisor, who somehow feels that this team member is a good performer, and you don't have too much of time to get into a conflict, to understand and decide on some other area of action, because you want to get this person out of the team, get someone else and take the team forward. Now in this situation, you may want to push through on this conflict with your supervisor, that yes, I know better about this team member and I'd like to let him go. Now in these kind of situations, as you can see, competing to resolve the conflict is a good idea. Let's take a third example. Let's say somebody is trying to take advantage of a situation. There's a client on whom you are overly dependent, and the client has started asking for ridiculous discounts on your product. You know that you cannot offer those kind of discounts, and at the same time this client is someone who is important. So here you may have to be a little more assertive when you engage in a conversation with that client and push through to make him understand that this is not possible. So at this kind of a conflict, you'll have to find a way to get your way done. Now let's look at an example where some of your team members have been working very hard on a project and they want to take a couple of days off. Now you feel that there's a lot of work remaining and they cannot afford to take these 2 days off. It's important to keep working on the project. But then you realize that your team members are actually needing this rest, this break, and they are getting sensitive about this whole issue. So here it will be a bad idea to push through the conflict, because though you may get them to come to work on those 2 days, but then their productivity will go down. So in situations where people are very sensitive about the whole thing, or it may damage relationships on a long-term basis, there you may not want to engage in a very assertive way to get your things done. Also, if there is a situation where things are not urgent, I mean, you have time to resolve the conflict. Maybe it's about the kind of strategy that you have to plan for the next 6 months, and you have the next 30 days or 40 days to work on that strategy, and you are getting into some kind of a conflict with your supervisor around it. Well, you don't need to push through at this time. You could discuss, argue, resolve, and reach some kind of a collaborative solution. Not a great idea to push through in such a situation. Also, sometimes when a buy-in is important, because you are engaging with somebody important, and if that person doesn't agree to your point of view, it will not work. So even if the situation is urgent, you have to get things done, but the other person's buy-in is very important, then it's not a good idea to push through in terms of a competitive approach, because then that person will not agree to what is being done, and will damage the relationship or the productivity of the team later. Now let's look at the fourth approach, which is compromise. Now, as you can see, compromise is right there in the middle, equally high on assertion and equally high on cooperation. Compromise sounds like something which is not very positive, which is not very progressive. But sometimes actually compromise is a great idea to resolve conflicts. Now let's look at some of the situations where compromise is a great idea to manage conflicts. So let's say a decision has to be taken, and where both the parties are important. In that case, a compromise is a good idea, because we know that we are losing something. The other person also feels that we are losing something, but we need to move forward. So let's say you're buying a house and you have a small window in which you need to decide and take a decision and buy the house. And the window is in the next 15 to 20 days. And you're getting into a conflict with your spouse as to what kind of a house to buy among the 2 or 3 options that you have with you. So you work on a compromise. You give up on your choice of the house you'd like to buy. Your spouse gives up on his or her choice of the house that he or she would like to buy, and you may go for a third option, which is okay for both of you. Now it's a compromise, because you have also lost something, the other person also lost something, but you agree to something with which you can move forward, right? Now this is also a very important approach, and which can sometimes be used effectively for certain situations. Another situation where compromise is usually very effective is where both the parties have equal power. Because what happens is, when 2 parties have equal power, they will keep fighting and the conflict will not go away. And that will start impacting the productivity of those people or the relationship or whatever else. So in that kind of a situation, it's smarter for those parties to realize that honestly we can keep fighting on this, so let's compromise. Let's look at something which both of us can agree to and move forward. On the other hand, a compromise is not a good idea when the situation is extremely urgent. If things have to be done now, then wasting time on trying to compromise will not help. In that case, you may want to be more competitive or more accommodative. Or in case one person holds more power than the other, in that case, a compromise could be a waste of time, because the person who has more power may want to take a veto on the decision and move forward. Also, if a variety of needs have to be met, then a compromise might be a loss, because in that case, both of you will actually lose much more than you will gain. So let's take the example of the house again. Let's say the conflict is not just in terms of the location of the house, but it could also be in terms of the kind of house, the society or the neighborhood, and a lot of other things. Now, if you have three options and you decide to go for the third option, which neither of you had chosen yourself in the first place, then you may realize that the third option actually was not good at all in many of the other factors or needs that need to be fulfilled here. So if there are a variety of needs that have to be resolved, then it's a good idea to collaborate, discuss, and reach a proper conclusion on what has to be done. Finally, we come to the most powerful option to resolve conflicts, and which is collaborate. And as you can see, collaboration is high on both assertion and cooperation. This is more difficult but most effective, because here you need to demonstrate both the opposites, assertion and cooperation. This is what we need to bring in as much as we can into our lives, because collaboration ensures that we truly leverage that conflict and help it to improve the quality of the team, our own productivity, and our relationships. But it's not easy, because it requires us to be able to listen to the other person and to be able to give our point of view effectively to the other party. Now, there are certain situations where collaboration definitely is very useful. For example, if the situation is not urgent, because collaboration needs a little bit more time. You can't speed up a collaborative process. So if the situation is not urgent, it's a great idea to try and be collaborative, to try and look for a win-win solution, to try to look beyond what we think is the right way to do things. Suppose a very important decision has to be made. Let's say a career choice. And you are in conflict with, let's say, your spouse. Your spouse feels that you should be not leaving this organization, moving to a new one, and you are thinking that it's good if I move away from this organization. Now, this is a very important career choice and an important decision for you. In this kind of a situation, it's important for you to engage effectively, collaborate with the other person, and reach a decision which is win-win. So let's say there is a very important decision to be taken, where the perspectives of both the parties in that conflict are very important. So for example, let's say you are setting up the budget for the next year. Now the situation is not urgent. It's not that the decision has to be taken within a few days, but the decision has to be taken very carefully. It's an important decision. Now you have a certain point of view on how the money should be prioritized and allocated, and a colleague of yours has a different point of view on this. Both of you bring in a lot of understanding, wisdom, and research on the subject. Both the perspectives are important. Both have to be considered. Now, in this kind of a situation, a collaborative effort to resolve the conflict is very important. Because in this situation, if any one of you tries to compete, or the other one tries to accommodate, or avoid or compromise, you will get a suboptimal solution to this challenge. When you collaborate, you bring in a high level of assertion and cooperation. So when you are being cooperative, You're listening to the other point of view. You're really trying to empathize, be in their shoes, understand their point of view, perspective, or the argument that they're bringing in. When you're being assertive, you are making sure that your point is being heard. Your argument, your research, your perspective is being considered by the other party. Now, while you are doing this, you're also really working together to look at a win-win solution, something which is beyond the constraints of both the perspectives, something which lifts this whole situation to the next level. And that is where collaboration actually succeeds. So, wherever it's not an urgent, here and now kind of a situation where an important decision has to be taken, where a lot of people are involved, a lot of factors are involved. Where if you say that, okay, let us take a quick decision on this, and we will consider only one or two factors, we will ignore the rest, then you might realize later that this decision didn't work for you. So when multiple factors are involved, it has to be collaborative in terms of how you take the decision. Also, if it's a situation which keeps coming up again and again, and in earlier occasions, any other kind of approach of competition or avoidance or compromise or accommodation, other approaches have not worked, in that case you need to move towards collaboration. It's interesting that any relationship that you have, whether it's at work or at home, usually starts having conflicts right from day one or very early in the relationship. Depends on how the relationship is moving forward. But as it deepens, conflicts emerge. Initially, all of us try to take the easier paths. Either we push our way through, that is, we are more in a competitive state, or we accommodate because we feel it's more important to build a relationship, to get a buy-in. It's okay, let me give in to what the other person is demanding. Eventually, we start reaching a point of compromise where we say, okay, let's look at a third option. But eventually, the relationship starts improving when both of us learn to collaborate, where we say, okay, we are not giving up on what we feel is important, but we are also respecting what you feel is important. Let's look at both of them together and let's collaborate to find something that takes care of all the aspects in this situation. On the other hand, situations where a decision has to be made very quickly or the matter is too trivial to spend time on, then it's advisable that we don't spend our effort or energy to collaborate on a decision. In that case, we could generally move on with either avoidance, accommodation, competition, or a compromise. So, as you would have understood, collaboration is critical in important areas of conflict. And that is where you have to use your skills to make a difference on the decision that is being taken. So with this, we have learned about all the 5 different approaches that we can take in the TK instrument. Now we'll look at the mindsets that will help us succeed in managing conflicts. In an earlier module, we learned that there are 3 ways that we can react to a conflict situation. These reactions are primal and they are not useful in managing those conflicts. And these reactions are that we might end up fighting, we might end up running away, or we just freeze where we are. We just don't do anything towards that conflict. And on the other hand, there is a state where we face the conflict where we react proactively. Now, this reaction of yours, which is a proactive reaction, could eventually make you decide to avoid the conflict. It may allow you to decide to accommodate in the situation because something else is more important, or it may require you to compete because you want to get your way through. It's important for you. You may compromise, or because it's a critical and important decision and too many stakeholders, you may decide to spend time and energy to collaborate on it. But while you are doing all these things, there's a specific mindset which makes all the difference to how you resolve that problem. So the first most important mindset is to stop judging. Now, judging people comes very naturally to us. We are always trying to slot people, situations, organizations, groups, and events because that makes it easier for us to decipher life and to take decisions on what do we need to do next. In conflict situations, sometimes it becomes very important to step back, refuse to judge people, and observe, listen, and look very objectively at the overall situation. The moment we stop judging, we are able to empathize, we are able to look from the other person's perspective, and we are able to add value to the overall discussion so that it moves forward. Judging is a problem that starts from within ourselves, and as we discussed earlier in the same module, judging is a problem which causes conflicts inside us. We are judging ourselves all the time. We are always deciding whether have we done a good job or not, if you could have done better, why are we not good, which are our areas of weakness, our areas of strength, how do we rate in comparison to other people around us. This kind of a judgment is constantly happening inside our minds. There's a small voice which is speaking and telling us what we think about ourselves. The same habit comes out and starts doing the same thing for other people. And it aggravates itself when there is a conflict situation. Especially if the conflict situation is making us feel threatened, fearful, afraid of losing out. Because that is when we become truly judgmental. We start having preconceived notions about the other person. We start criticizing the other person. We start deciding that this person is not good enough, or is coming with a very negative perspective, a negative point of view on the situation, and the person has to be suppressed or pushed away. So the mindset doesn't help us at all. That's the first mindset which is very important for us to resolve conflicts effectively, is to stop judging people. The second mindset, which is very important, is to listen with an open mind. Now, listening is not easy. We think that we are listening, but most of the time, we are actually listening to prepare the answer that we will give afterwards. We want to speak, we want to tell others what we think, but we don't truly want to listen to what the other person is saying. Or if we do listen, we have filters in our mind which decide whether the person is saying the right thing or not. The other day, I was indulging in something, a food, which is not good for me. And I have been having that food after a very long time. I was enjoying myself. Now, I was given some feedback by a family member that I should be restraining myself, that this doesn't help. And in the long term, it might be harmful for me. I could not listen to that simple advice with an open mind. I started judging this person right away. It was a trivial thing. And this kind of showcases how these kind of conflicts come up daily, so frequently in our lives. And whenever they come up, we sometimes miss out on the right approach to tackling them. Listening with an open mind is very critical to managing conflicts effectively. Another mindset which is very important is to share our thoughts assertively. We have to share what we feel is important in this situation. To take the same example of this specific food or dish that I was enjoying and I was indulging in. Now, it happened to be an ice cream. And while I was indulging in it, I was given some feedback that this is not good for me and it might harm me in the long term. Now here, I had my own point of view on being correct about having an ice cream. Now this was because I had been restraining myself for a long time and I felt justified to have ice cream on that day. So I could have shared my point of view in a respectful and polite way. But instead, I reacted. So I became a bit aggressive. So here the important word in the third mindset is assertion, not aggression. We need to share our point of view, but politely, respectfully, and assertively. We should try and minimize the emotions that come laden with this kind of a response, because that emotion has a domino effect on the emotions of other people and which escalates again to a shouting match, and that doesn't take the conflict anywhere. It actually aggravates the conflict. A fourth mindset is to seek higher solutions. Now, seeking higher solutions is a very distinct way of thinking. This can happen only if the first three mindsets have been taken care of. When you stop judging someone, you listen with an open mind, and you share your thoughts politely and respectfully. That is when you create that space, that sacred environment in which both of you can look at higher solutions. The discussion is respectful, polite, open, accepting of the other's point of view, and both are willing to look at something which is agreeable and much superior to the other solutions which are being offered. So, seeking higher solutions is a state of mind which can make a dramatic difference to any conflict. So till now in this module, first we understood the TKI instrument and the 5 different approaches to managing conflicts. Then we looked at the 4 important mindsets that help us to resolve conflicts. Now finally, let us look at a few things that we should avoid so that we can resolve or manage conflicts effectively. The first thing we should avoid is to accuse the personality aspects which cannot be changed. When we make statements like, "You're always like this," "You will never change," "You always come late," "You don't dress up well," "I don't like your face." Now these are statements which are generalized and which are directed at the other person, not his or her actions. These statements don't give the other person an option to improve themselves because it's stating a fact which cannot be changed most of the time. If I start body shaming someone, well, that person cannot do much about it, at least in the immediate future. So we'll have to truly absorb that insult and react appropriately. Another important thing that we need to take care of is that we don't react emotionally. Usually conflict situations cause us to start reacting emotionally because we are having this feeling of fear of losing out. We are afraid, we feel that we are being attacked. But here is where we need to avoid these emotions. We need to ensure that these emotions don't creep into our conversation. Emotions have this amazing ability to get transferred to the other person. They're very infectious. So if you bring in emotions into your voice, before you realize it, the other person will start mirroring those emotions. And the whole thing will escalate to something very different from what you desired. Another very important aspect of conflict management is that you refuse to step back before it's due. Sometimes we just avoid, though it should not be avoided. We step back, we don't hold our position. Holding our position politely and respectfully is critical to resolving that conflict. And we need to be there, trying to listen and at the same time being assertive about what we feel should be done in that situation. One more very interesting aspect is don't make it too serious. Humor can be very effective in resolving conflicts. Make it fun. De-escalate the criticality of the situation. And you'll realize that the conflict is getting resolved much faster. One more very interesting psychological aspect is about the words that we use. We should avoid using words like but or no. When you use the word but, it kind of neutralizes all the good things that you've said before you have used that word. So you may be praising a person and saying that you've done a great job, your perspective sounds good, I think your approach is very interesting, but the moment you say but, you kind of negate everything good that you have said before it. So avoid using the word so that you can be more inclusive of the other person's perspective and your perspective. Another word which can be very detrimental to resolving conflicts is the word no. Whenever we use the word no, we are kind of negating all that is positive about the conversation. So avoid using the word no as far as possible. So with this, we come to the end of this module. In this module, we have looked at a very important aspect of conflict management, and which is how do we actually manage conflicts. We talked about the TKI instrument and the 5 different approaches along the lines of assertion and cooperation, which can be used to manage conflicts. We learned about the 5 critical mindsets which help us to approach conflicts in a positive and effective way. And we also looked at a few things we should avoid when we are managing conflicts. So with this, we come largely to the end of the course, and we will close with a summary of the whole course in the final module, which will be coming up next. Thank you.